Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive today. We are talking about something, that I think a lot of people don't really talk about, which is financial trauma.
Yeah.
And we're not just talking about money troubles here,
Right.
but how like your financial life can really impact your mental well-being, how you feel, how you act, your day-to-day life.
Yeah.
Just think about this. A crazy statistic is that 61% of Americans are actually living paycheck to paycheck. So you can imagine,
Wow.
like any little thing that happens could really throw things into a spiral.
It is pretty fascinating, right? I think oftentimes when we think about trauma, we think about these huge life-altering events, and we forget that trauma is really like personal.
Yeah,
What might be just a little annoyance for one person could be like a completely debilitating experience for somebody else. And that's especially true, I think, when it comes to finances.
totally. So then like what kind of pushes someone over the edge into actual financial trauma?
Yeah, well, job loss is a big one.
Yeah.
And it's not just about the income. It's about that loss of identity, the security, the routine.
Right.
Imagine you're like, I don't know, standing on solid ground and then someone pulls the rug out from under you.
Yeah.
And that feeling of free fall, that's very real for a lot of people who are facing job loss.
So can you talk more about that feeling of loss of control and how that can lead to trauma? And like, what are some other scenarios where that kind of comes into play?
Definitely. Another one would be something like inflation. It's kind of like when you have a slow leak in your tire, you might not notice it at first, but eventually it's going to leave you completely stranded.
Yeah.
And so that constant like erosion of your buying power, it can be so stressful.
Yeah.
And lead to this feeling of helplessness.
Right.
And then there's the scenario of working really hard and just not earning enough.
Right.
Like I think there was a statistic a while back of a single mom who would have to work 6 minimum wage jobs just to make ends meet. That's crazy to think about. And that chronic struggle, the feeling of being trapped in that cycle of poverty, that can be really traumatic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's heartbreaking to think about. And then, life just kind of throws curveballs, right?
Mm-hmm.
Medical emergencies or a sudden home repair, boom, thousands of dollars, just like that. How do events like that contribute to financial trauma?
These unexpected costs, I think it creates this constant feeling of taking one step forward, 2 steps back.
Yeah.
And it's even more challenging when people are forced to take on even more debt just to stay afloat.
Oh, wow.
Which, just perpetuates the cycle. It's a really, tragically ironic situation to be in.
So we've talked about some of the causes. Let's talk about some of the effects. How does financial trauma show up in people's lives? Like, how do we actually see it?
Yeah, well, there's the very visible signs, right? Like declining living conditions or people having to sell off their possessions.
Yeah.
Or the physical toll of stress manifesting as health problems.
Right.
But then there's also these, more invisible wounds, the anxiety, the depression, the shame that can really make people isolate themselves.
So why do you think people are so hesitant to talk about their finances and their financial struggles? Do you think that's part of what makes the invisible wounds so hard to heal?
Totally. I think there's just so much stigma around money.
Yeah.
And people often blame themselves. They feel like failures, even though their circumstances might be completely out of their control.
Yeah.
And when you're already feeling that vulnerable and ashamed, it's really hard to reach out for help.
It's like that financial stress is taking up so much mental space that it leaves you with less room to cope with anything else.
Exactly. It can really impact, your ability to think clearly, make sound decisions, and even maintain healthy relationships.
Yeah.
And it often leads to this downward spiral of just negative self-talk and self-doubt.
So this really highlights how interconnected our financial and mental well-being are. But it's not just happening on like an individual level. There's these bigger societal issues at play, right?
Absolutely. Financial trauma doesn't impact everyone equally. There are these systemic barriers that make certain groups much more vulnerable.
Yeah, this is where things start to get really interesting. So tell me more about that.
Okay. For example, racial minorities often have less access to wealth-building opportunities like home ownership or investing.
Right.
They face higher interest rates on loans and encounter discrimination in various forms.
Yeah.
So all of these factors create a much steeper climb towards financial stability.
And women and gender minorities face a really unique set of challenges too, right?
Right. The gender pay gap still persists. That's a huge one.
Oh.
And women are often charged more for certain products and services. Have you heard of the pink tax?
Yeah, the pink tax.
It's crazy.
It's wild.
And then on top of that, there's career limitations and then the societal expectations around caregiving responsibilities.
Yeah.
All these things contribute to their financial vulnerability.
It's like these systemic issues create this like domino effect, making certain groups so much more susceptible to financial shocks.
Yeah.
What are some other groups that are disproportionately affected by this?
We can't forget about, the LGBTQ plus community.
Yeah.
They face discrimination when it comes to employment and housing, which obviously impacts their ability to, earn a living and build financial security.
Right.
And then people with disabilities often have very limited job options and may face higher medical costs,
Yeah.
which further adds to their financial strain. I think it's really crucial to recognize these systemic barriers because we're not talking about like personal failings here, but rather systems that are set up in a way that makes it so much harder for certain groups to achieve, any kind of financial well-being.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's important to remember that, it doesn't just affect individuals' financial trauma. It has this ripple effect on families and communities.
Right.
And addressing those systemic issues is like crucial to creating a more just and equitable society.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of heavy stuff.
Yeah.
It's easy to feel overwhelmed, but there's got to be ways to heal, right?
Yeah.
Like to build resilience.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, even in the face of all these challenges, there's always hope, and they're very like practical steps we can take
Okay.
to, mitigate the impact of financial trauma and move towards healing.
I like that. So what are some strategies that can help people kind of flip the script and move towards a path of healing?
Well, one key aspect is building resilience.
Okay.
It's about learning how to bounce back from setbacks, developing healthy coping mechanisms, and cultivating this solutions-oriented mindset.
So helpful, especially when dealing with like the inevitable financial ups and downs. But like, how do you actually build that resilience when you're facing such like overwhelming challenges?
Yeah, it's a process, and it looks different for everyone.
Right.
But one really effective approach is focusing on financial literacy and support. Knowledge is power, and understanding how money works. Things like budgeting, saving, investing.
Right.
These things can help individuals regain a sense of control.
So it's about like empowering people with the tools and knowledge to manage their finances.
Yes, exactly.
Like effectively.
Yeah.
Are there any like specific resources or programs that you find to be really helpful?
Oh, tons. And it's not just about that like technical knowledge, but also about having access to supportive resources and guidance. Lots of communities offer financial counseling services, workshops, even online resources that can provide personalized support and education.
Awesome. And what about like the social aspect of this? We talked about how isolating financial trauma can be.
Yeah.
How do we break down those barriers and foster, more community support?
You're so right. Isolation can really worsen the effects of financial trauma.
Mm-hmm.
So that community support is it's essential.
Yeah.
Connecting with others who understand your struggles, whether it's through support groups, online forums, or even just talking openly with trusted friends and family can provide a sense of belonging, shared resources, and invaluable emotional support.
It's like breaking that isolation and realizing that we're not in this alone. What role does goal setting play in this whole healing process?
Oh, goal setting and actualization are so important in regaining a sense of agency and purpose.
Okay.
When you're in the midst of financial trauma, it can really feel like you're constantly being tossed around by these external forces.
Right.
So setting achievable goals, even small ones, and creating a roadmap for the future can help restore a sense of control, a sense of direction.
It's like taking back the reins.
Exactly.
Going from this feeling of powerlessness to empowerment.
Exactly. Yeah, and celebrating those small wins along the way, that is so crucial.
Yeah.
It helps rebuild confidence and motivates you to keep moving forward. It reinforces the idea that you are capable of achieving your goals.
Totally. Is there anything else you want to add about the specific steps that people can take to really flip the script on their financial trauma before we move on from healing?
I think it's important to also remember to address those root causes of the trauma. Remember those systemic inequalities we talked about?
Yeah.
We need to advocate for policy changes, challenge discriminatory practices, and work towards creating a more equitable system that supports everyone's financial well-being.
So it's not just about individual solutions, but recognizing that larger societal context. and working to create that systemic change. What can listeners do to get involved in that process?
Oh my gosh, there's so many ways to make a difference. You can support organizations that are fighting for economic justice, contact your elected officials to advocate for policies that promote financial equity, and just educate yourself and others about these issues.
It's about using our voices and our actions to create a more just world for everyone.
Okay, so we've talked about the causes, the consequences, the pathways to healing, but how do we know if we're actually experiencing financial trauma? What are some signs we should be looking out for?
That's a great question. Financial trauma can manifest in so many ways, and sometimes the symptoms aren't really obvious.
Right.
But one common sign is this persistent anxiety or fear around money,
Okay.
even when your finances are relatively stable.
So it's like that feeling of never being able to relax, even if you know you can pay your bills.
Exactly. You might also experience, difficulty sleeping, changes in appetite, increased irritability, just a general sense of dread.
Classic signs of stress.
Exactly.
How do you differentiate between everyday money stress and actual financial trauma?
Yeah, it's about the intensity and the duration of those feelings.
So,
If they're constant, overwhelming, and they start to interfere with your daily life, your relationships, your ability to, function at work,
yeah.
then it might be a sign that you're dealing with something more serious.
So it's about recognizing when those feelings become debilitating and start to have a negative impact on your overall well-being. What are some other signs to watch out for?
You might find yourself withdrawing from social activities, feeling ashamed or embarrassed to talk about money,
Right.
or engaging in unhealthy coping mechanisms, like overspending or substance abuse.
Yeah.
Or even isolating yourself from loved ones.
So it sounds like recognizing the symptoms early on is key to getting the support that you need.
Absolutely. And remember, seeking help is a sign of strength, not weakness. Talking to someone, whether it's a therapist, a financial counselor, or even a trusted friend or family member, can make a world of difference.
It's that reminder that you don't have to go through it alone. Okay, so before we wrap up this whole deep dive into financial trauma, let's revisit that idea of flipping the script. What does that actually look like, practically? Yeah, I think it's about taking control of your financial narrative and creating a new story for yourself.
Okay.
It's about shifting your mindset from, scarcity and fear to abundance and empowerment.
That sounds like such a powerful shift. But how do you actually go about doing that? Especially when you're already struggling.
You're right. It's not an overnight process.
Yeah.
It starts with small steps. Set realistic financial goals, create a budget that works for you, and seek out resources to increase your financial literacy.
It's about taking those little steps, building that foundation, and taking action to create positive change. What else can people do to really flip the script?
Don't underestimate the power of self-care. Make time for activities that bring you joy and help reduce stress. Connecting with supportive people who uplift and encourage you is also crucial.
Those are such good reminders. I think sometimes when we're struggling, we forget to take care of ourselves mentally and emotionally. We're so focused on fixing the problem, we kind of forget to nurture ourselves in the process.
Exactly. And don't forget to celebrate your accomplishments no matter how small they seem.
Right.
Acknowledge your progress and give yourself credit for taking steps towards healing.
Yeah, it's about shifting that focus from what's wrong to what's going right, and recognizing those little victories can really boost your confidence and keep you motivated.
Absolutely. And remember, healing takes time. Be patient with yourself and celebrate the journey, even with its ups and downs.
This has been such an insightful conversation. Before we wrap up this deep dive into financial trauma, what's one message you want our listeners to take away from this episode?
Financial trauma is a real and valid experience. It impacts individuals, families, and entire communities. But there is hope. Healing is possible, and there are resources available to help you along the way.
I love that message of hope. And remember, you are not alone on this journey. Reaching out for help is a sign of strength, not weakness. And taking care of your financial well-being is an act of self-love. So as we always say on the deep dive, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep into the topics that matter most.